attempting to make this tier list of trans stories, the main thing I've discovered is that it really depends on what your definition of a trans story is about. If you want to go for a really broad definition, as in a person completely changes from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, then that can cover all kinds of genres, all kinds of time periods, a whole lot of different stories. I think we need to limit things down a little bit. Let's perhaps try to limit it down to a character that undergoes a physical change. Well, this seems a little closer. Going by Disney's interpretation of The Little Mermaid, Ariel longs for a different body, goes to a sea witch for some very sketchy bottom surgery, and is unable to speak because of her voice training. That seems pretty close. But then, what if we go to, say, Greek mythology? The story of Arachnia, a foolish mortal who attempted to outdo one of the goddesses and was punished by being turned into what we today call a spider. No, that doesn't really work either. Let's maybe just stick to stories where the physical change has to do with a person's gender. That one kind of makes sense. The problem is we then run into the gender swap trope, which can kind of teach lessons about what it's like to live in different genders. But usually at the end of said story, those that have swapped back, and they're happy for that. I propose that this would be a trans story if the character undergoing such a physical transformation likes it. However, we really need to polish that definition a little bit, as there are stories of people enjoying said gender, but for more perverted reasons. The ability to be able to see yourself naked, or going into more restricted areas that the person's original gender wouldn't have allowed. Or I think back to this one cancelled sitcom, I'm not sure if it went anywhere, it was called Working It, where essentially this one guy really needed a job. However, this company was only hiring women. So he changed his identity to that of a female persona, so that way he could get the job. However, there's another hitch, as his best friend promised him that if he ever did find a job, that he'd be able to get him one as well. Well, that was the condition. This workplace was only hiring women, so both characters became women, even though they were male. This story doesn't really fit the definition so well, as neither character really cares that much about their gender if it involves getting their main goal. Let me see if I can get this all straight, because obviously I'm not. We're looking at a story where a character, preferably the main character, wants to become another gender, or has become another gender, and likes it this way. Apologies for the intense TED Talk to begin this video off, but I've read a lot of books, and just trying to limit down what books would fit into such a category, that was important. Otherwise I'd be listing off all the books that I have read, with very few exceptions. Right, let's get into this. I guess probably the first thing to note before going any further is that I'm going to be ranking these by how much I personally enjoyed them. If I was going to be ranking them by trans representation, the list would maybe be a little different, but I want to also say that I'm a pretty easygoing person, so I say close enough, and as long as you don't have anything that's overtly offensive, I'd say you got good representation. Well, that, and to make sure you don't severely dumb it down. But anyway, let's get into this. Well, I, as well as probably a lot of other people, have been led to believe that the idea of being transgender is a relatively modern phenomenon. However, it's difficult to find, but there are stories out there of people wanting to transition for a very long time. In fact, I remember there was a story of an ancient emperor, I want to say Roman offhand, who very much wanted the transition, but obviously never had the technology at the time. But probably the first person that really sparked this idea that this is a phenomenon that's been around for a while is the story of Christine Jorgenson. A lot of people tell me that I have an old soul, and after reading her story, I can see why. I find myself relating to Christine a lot by how she describes her story in the book. I think probably the biggest thing I love about her is the idea that she's not an activist. Really, she just went for the old trope of what's the best revenge? Living your best life. And that's exactly what she did. But all the same, this book feels like it almost crossed some sort of dimensional rift in a few capacities, as when her story broke out, it caused quite the stir across a lot of people. In fact, I remember there was a picture in here, I can't seem to find it unfortunately, that showed all the various newspaper articles proclaiming her story. But yet, if you were to talk about her today, unless you're in some sort of Rainbow Alliance circle, nobody is going to know who you're talking about. In fact, that might be a bit of a fun thing, is if you know somebody that was alive during her time, ask them if they knew about Christine. I'd be very curious to know what happened. And on top of that, it's crazy how the intro of the book sounds like it could have been written about 5 years ago if you just substitute the outdated term of transsexual with transgender. And the end of the book sounded like things were pretty hopeful. It's like, hey, we have the ability to be able to perform these surgeries and get these kind of synthetic hormones into us, even in the United States now. So what happened? That is the subject of another video, but yes, this is a fantastic book, and one of the few I had a very hard time putting down. And even more exclusive than that, this is a book I've read twice. It's very rare that I ever read a book more than once. Yeah, honestly, S tier. Not gonna lie, a part of me was kind of annoyed that I had to pay full price for this book, but I'd say it was very much worth it. Chi's story is a fun one, and once again, this is something I can relate to. So, for those of you that may not be in the inner circle of just hearing other people's transition stories, it seems like you got either one of two categories. Actually, I guess there's a few categories. Forget counting them, but essentially you got people that knew that they were trans from a very young age and may or may not have had the ability to be able to transition from such a young age. And then there are people like Chi, as well as myself, who didn't really discover this until well into adulthood. And Chi's struggles were very relatable in that way, as, well, we tried to fit into society as what people would call a quote-unquote man, but, well, I mean, we could do it, but it just didn't really bring us joy. But when we first started out living life as a woman, it's like, yeah, this is so much better. There's no way of going back. And it also kind of brings up a different perspective. The idea of what it's like to bring up being trans when you're dating somebody. I've either been fortunate or unfortunate enough to not have to deal with such a thing myself. But either way, this is just one of those stories that it makes me happy. It's rather heartwarming. I think probably the moment that sticks out the most to me about this story is there was one time where Chi is dating somebody in college, and their date asks him a very important question. Would you rather be loved as a man or a woman? Her as well as myself, I would have had no idea how to be able to answer that question, but the idea that there was somebody in your life that was willing to love you either way, the ability that you could choose between one or the other, that gets me in the feels. Also S tier. Well, I made a whole review about this book a little while back. So, just in case I didn't mention where I found this book, there was a coworker that was also transitioning. I feel very much like a trailblazer because once I, as well as the administration, helped hammer out all the details of what it means to be trans, how to be able to explain this to people and whatnot, she came out about like 1 or 2 months afterwards. I just remember we would meet up for lunch together in the break room, and she was reading this book, and I'm like, hey, that seems interesting. Can I borrow it when you're done? Yeah, sure. Well, it was an entertaining read. Once again, it was quite a page turner. I wanted to know what happened next. But now that I'm far removed from it, I think there's only really one scene that just sticks out in my mind. And that's when what was her name? I know it was something Violet offhand. I want to say Mia Violet? Maya? One of the two. But anyway, she was in a relationship with a girlfriend that was very supportive of her. And so she would often send dresses and whatnot to Violet's house. Usually this was to save on postage, but this time she called her up and it's just like, hey, did my package make it there? Yeah, it made it there, all right. Ah, good. Why don't you open it? Opened it up, and it was just a nice polka-dotted dress. And she says, well, why don't you try it on? Once again, that's just a nice, heartwarming feeling. I love it. Probably a B tier, I would wager, yeah. When I read this one, I only knew it as Onii-chan is done for, but I guess the actual title is Onii-mai, I am now your sister. In fact, that's the name of the anime adaptation that was based off the manga that I read. I have a bit of a hard time putting this one on the list. I feel like it just kind of squeaks by mere technicality. So it's about our main character, I'm gonna probably butcher these names, Mahiro, who is, I believe the term is neat. Basically, they just live in the house. They haven't left in like several years, watching nothing but porn, playing video games and whatnot, all this other stuff. So, his older sister, Mahira, turns him into a junior high school girl. Now, once again, it just seems like this is a bit more of like a gender swap story, but, well, in the first volume of it, it very much felt like Mahiro enjoyed his life as a girl. Of course, as the story goes on, it gets a little more complex, as at first it was more because of the change in gender that he enjoyed. But as the story goes on, it's more about the life he has built as a girl. So it seems like the idea of the gender isn't really in the forefront of it, but because of that first volume, that's why I'm putting it on this list. I've read this one multiple times, and I will admit, graphic novels and manga are pretty easy for me to digest. I feel like with books, after a while, it's like, okay, I made several pages, I should probably take a break. While with manga, I'm just kind of like, oh, come on, it's only going to be like another 5 minutes. It's only going to be another 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Why do my eyes hurt so much? Okay, I should probably take a break. Don't get me wrong, I like regular, shall I say, word books as well, but graphic novels and manga go very quickly for me. I'm going to put this in A tier. While it's something that I've read multiple times and probably will read even more times, I will admit the whole trans angle of the story does really disappear the more I read it. Wandering Sun. Ah, yes. I've heard this one has developed a fair bit of controversy over the years, and not from the sources that you would think. Obviously, there are going to be people that are just like, what, you can't talk about trans people in a more child-friendly way? You're going to infect the kids with your whatever. They don't really have much of a word for it as far as I can tell, but the controversy also seems to come from, I guess, the trans community as well. At least I think. I've talked with a lot of trans people, and it seems like no two have the same opinion. Well, at least on that. If you talk to them about politics or religion, it seems like there's only one opinion you're allowed to have. But this book, I think, is pretty genius. I mean, the idea that it came out back in 2003 before this was a, shall we say, hip and relevant topic, it handled it with more tact and more sensitivity than a lot of other stories have, even in our modern times, I would say. I will admit, it does kind of feel like there's a bit of a cop-out at the end. I'm not going to go into spoilers in case you're interested, but the gist is you got two main characters, and I think this is where the title Wandering Son comes from. You got a boy that would rather be a girl and a girl that'd rather be a boy. So it's like the son wanders between houses, or at least that's the way I read the title. I think the original Japanese title is just the name of the main characters, but I think the title Wandering Son works fantastically. It's a great story, but I gotta tell you, this is one of those stories that's just gonna punch you right in the gut, and it's something that you really have to kind of take breaks with every so often. Otherwise, you're going to think that there's just no hope for humanity or no chance for happiness in the short mortal lives that we live. But I think it's a good story all the same. Even if there's a few sections that's just like, but no, they accept you, be yourself. Fantastic story, but it's just a little too much for me. Stop Hibari-Kun. This one I put more under the category of the main character wanting to be a girl rather than actually becoming one, at least in the span of it. Unfortunately, it was cancelled before it got finished, which is quite a bit of a shame, as the end later introduces a trans mask character, which, well, even in this day and age, it seems like there's quite a lot of erasure around that. But I think it comes more from the idea that a boy becoming a girl is very, like, shocking. It's something to get people interested. But yet a girl becoming a boy, it's like, well, yeah, isn't that just normal? It isn't. But a lot of media has kind of portrayed it so. The idea that, ooh, if a girl was a bit more mannish, then perhaps men would like more girls. Or if a man was more girlish, then the girls would love him more. We all like what we can't have. After all, I kind of wanted straight hair when I first started, but I've come to like the curls, actually. I get compliments on it all the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a very interesting story, as it's a comedy, but not in the way that you would think. Not in the Ace Ventura Pet Detective sort of comedy where the laughter is at the expense of the trans character. Here, the laughter is more at the idea that our trans character, well, Hibari, is just living her best life, and nobody can seem to understand why she's so happy about this. And even more than that, there's so many times where people try to reveal her. Whenever they try, they just look like a complete idiot in the process. Just know that it came out in the 1980s, and there is a character that's basically a depiction of blackface. At least I think. I mean, the guy stands like 8'7" and has a face like Easter Island head, with a giant nose ring as well. I don't know. I'm a white person. I don't know what's racist. Yeah, I'd probably put that in A tier as well. Not that it's bad, it's just I still get very burned at the idea that it wasn't finished. Next one is a little difficult. I mean, it obviously fits in my criteria, but it's not really the main character that's transitioning. It's just one of three main characters that the story bounces around a lot. It's like the equivalent of wanting to watch The Wizard of Oz because
I like the Tin Man.
main characters in there, but it's not really their story. On top of that, well, whenever I just mention the name, people are just kind of like, what is wrong with you? So it's called Bokura no Hentai, which everyone would just be like, hentai, it's porn, isn't it? No. No, it's not. In fact, it's probably easier to go with the English translation, which I think roughly translates to Our Strange Transformation or something like that. Anyway, if you thought The Wandering Sun was dark, this one, I'd say, is just as dark, but it actually ends on a pretty happy note, so I'd say this is like the good ending of Wandering Sun. And, well, when you actually can get past all the suffering, that good ending feels very good, very heartwarming. But, much like any good story, you have to have the suffering to show you how good the happiness is at the end. Of course, it's a delicate balance. You have too much suffering, the happiness at the end is going to mean nothing. If it was just the section with that one character, I'd give it an S tier. But we got so many other things clouding the story that I'm going to give it a B tier. I think it would just probably be easiest if I wrote this one down right here. How would you pronounce that? Let me know. This I put on the list as it brings a different perspective into the idea of trans storytelling. Our main story is that the only brother of the family has gone off to college for a while, and when he comes back, it's as their sister. And well, one of the sisters is very, very upset by this, as she very much loved her brother. And because we're talking about manga, I don't mean in an incest way. I just mean like brotherly or sisterly love, family love, that kind of love. And so she very much felt betrayed that she never really got the proper chance to say goodbye to her brother. It's just, okay, she's your sister now, and the brother is never coming home again. Once again, much like Wandering Sun, this one doesn't end the happiest. Very much a bittersweet ending. A realistic one, but definitely not one if you want to be put in a good mood. But once again, it adds a different perspective, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. Well, I very much enjoy what the story did. It's just a little too heart-wrenching for me to read through again. There are some highlights, but not enough for me to want to return. Until I Become Me. Once again, this adds another perspective onto it as well. It'd be the idea of what would happen if a trans kid, by some sort of strange magical intervention, became the gender they wanted to be before they ever felt the feelings of dysphoria. That's very much what this story goes into, and very much at first, Akira's just like, what? No, I'm a boy. Why am I being treated like a girl? Why do I have a girl's body now? I hate this. Especially since he very much wanted to be a man's man and, well, mercilessly bullied a girl just for being a girl, as he very much saw her as a threat to his ultra-masculinity. Along the way, it gets interesting as, well, there are so many people that are on Akira's side that are just kind of like, hey, my son only looks like this because he has some sort of deadly disease. If we had some way to change him back, we would. And as it would go further along in the story, Akira would just kind of be like, but I kind of like this. I like being a girl. What, is it wrong for me to like this? Once again, it kind of goes into some darker areas, but I feel like there's always a fair bit of light at the end of the tunnel. But let me just tell you, the very first chapter of this is probably about as dark as it gets. As, well, basically, the first day he's turned into a girl, the boys and the girls want revenge on him, so the boys essentially try to rape her, and the girls are like, yeah, with all the times you bullied us, we're not helping you out of this. It got to a point where she basically had to change schools and start up her own life all over again. All the while still having the guilt about this particular girl that Kira just destroyed in her youth. But hey, if you can get past that, the rest of the manga is pretty smooth sailing. And yeah, like I say, it's dark, but I think it's necessary as it really paints the picture as to why Akira acts the way they do, because they were heavily traumatized, and as such they have trust issues. It's a little hard to be judging this one, as it's still not finished yet, but from what does exist, yeah. I'm just gonna kind of put these both on the same category. So you got Super Late Bloomer, and you got My Life in Transition, all by Julia K. Yeah, I'll admit, I do like the idea. It's like, another trans woman named Julia. But believe me, that's pure coincidence. And it's also coincidence that I was watching Cowboy Bebop at the time and had no idea that Spike's girlfriend was also named Julia. I just like the name. But regardless, this is another one of those stories of becoming trans later in life. After you've found a place of your own, financial stability, and all this other stuff, you just kind of realize that, okay, I mean, I'm doing alright, but I'm not really happy with what I've got. And then in transitioning, it's like, okay, there's the happiness. And on top of that, I just love the style that Julia presents this story. It is in the style of old-fashioned newspaper comics, which I have a collection of, which are also book-bound. Not only are these stories a lot of fun, but there's a lot that I find rather relatable within some of these short 3-panel stories. Well, I do put both of these in the same category. I will actually rate them a little different. So I think A tier, because I do like being reminded of that more happy, energetic world of possibilities before your time in transitioning. Well, this one kind of reminds me of like, oh yeah, I'm kind of towards the end, and anything that I don't like, I'm gonna have to take care of through surgery rather than wait for the hormones to do their magic. And the last one I have on this list, I only just recently discovered, is called Magically Trans. Well, it's right there in the title. It's pretty obvious as to why I put this here. It's a rather fun, lighthearted story about a high school boy who wanted to join a magical girl club, only to realize that instead of being a magical girl appreciation club, the members actually become magical girls. And as such, our main character has experienced a joy that they never knew when they were a boy, and they just absolutely love doing everything that they can possible being a girl. It's a very heartwarming story, but at the same time, I'm insanely jealous because it was very much at that same time in my life that I would have done so many different things in order to live the life that this main character was at the time. But the only thing I wouldn't do is sell my soul to the devil, because that just seems like an awful deal. It's like, hey, you can live the life you want for like a good 50 years, but then for the rest of time, you'll burn for all eternity. I don't even know what kind of voice this is supposed to be. But regardless, I would have done everything I could to be able to live out this story in real life, and, well, I guess I kind of am now, so hint of jealousy, but also very much a feeling of, aww, they're enjoying being themselves. I remember when I was at that stage. It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, definitely an S tier. It's the most recent one on the list, but dang it. I just love the heartwarming nature of this story. It's not very often I get something that I'm able to read and I just immediately have a big smile on my face. I'm used to tragedies, which I do like the emotions that they stir up, but sometimes it's nice to break it up and have a little bit of something sweet. That's the end of my tier list, but I figure while I'm here, I might as well throw out some suggestions that I've had people tell me about. I haven't read any of them, and I must admit, with all the classics that I read, that's probably going to take up the rest of my life, but, well, maybe in between classics I might be able to find these and be able to read them. I mean, I've read all these trans stories, so I might be able to get around to them. So I'm just gonna list these off in no particular order. If you want to do more of a deep dive as to what these stories are about, be my guest. This is just me kind of giving you a bit of a launch pad. Where you want to fly to next is your choice. Becoming Nicole by Amy Ellis Nutt. Being Emily by Rachel Gold. If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo. Almost Perfect by Brian Catcher. Nevada by... I get the feeling I'm gonna butcher this poor author's name. Imogen Ni? Third Person by Emma Grove. And of course, I guess there's the classic that's just entitled Luna. However, I've heard that's not necessarily the best book either, and, well, it's really more of a curiosity as to, hey, why are there so many trans girls named Luna? Well, they were very much inspired by this book. So that's all I've got. If you got any other trans stories that you think are pretty good, perhaps someday I'll be able to get to them. I'm always curious, as I find myself having a hard time putting down these stories. Until next time, be yourself, no matter who that is.